All right. Welcome, everyone. We'll be starting in just a minute at 1 o'clock, but thank you for joining a bit early. And we have a question for the group to start off today's workshop. So if you could go to menti.com and enter the code shown on the screen, or you could use the link that Thomas is going to drop in the chat to go there directly. And please keep that open throughout today's workshop. We're going to be coming back to it a few times throughout the presentation and workshop. So if you could open that up and answer the question, what's one word that describes what happens to energy savings over time in your organization? And we'll get started in just a minute. And welcome to those joiners there. And if you could go to menti.com and answer the question that you see there. What's one word to describe what happens to energy savings over time in your organization? Just give a minute for people to join in and sign up for that. Thanks very much for joining our workshop today on sustaining energy savings from your EMIS. So we'll just have this opener question before we get into today's workshop. Right, reported, sustainable, measured. Good. Nice to see some positive sentiments coming out of what's happening to savings in your organization. Fluctuation, right? Maybe not consistent. So these are good. I appreciate seeing the positive sentiments of savings. A lot of what we talked about in today's workshop is how to make sure that those savings are sustainable, that they are more consistent, there is less fluctuation, that they don't degrade over time, which is what we do see sometimes. Before we get into that, we do have Jana Jedlowska from Save on Energy here today to talk a little bit about the expanded energy management program. So she's going to give some information to the group before we get into today's topic. Jana?
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Jay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jana, Senior Business Advisor here at the ISO with the Save on Energy team. Just like to dedicate a couple of minutes to let you know about some of our programs. I hope this isn't the first time that you're hearing about them. Hopefully this is a little bit of repetition, so I'll keep it nice and short, but do want to keep this at the top of your mind. So as you probably know, we have a whole suite of Save on Energy programs. It can be overwhelming at some points. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be only talking about two of those today. So the one on the right, the capability building ones that we're doing is what we're doing right now today at the webinar. So this is our training and support team delivering great webinars such as these. And the second one is our performance-based stream. And within this performance-based stream, we have a program called the Expanded Energy Management Program. And so this is the one that I want to highlight for you folks today. So next slide, please. So the Expanded Energy Management Program is composed of 4 subsections: the Energy Manager, the SEM as we call it, the Strategic Energy Management Learning. We have an EMIS, which is very topical today, and then we've got this training component. So our goal with this program is to empower your organizations to embed energy management into your day-to-day operations. So this is with dedicated personnel, with some strategic planning, and then with actionable tools. So let's start with the Energy Manager support. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a new initiative. It was launched in January of this year. It offers up to $100,000 per facility per year to help hire an energy manager. So there's a very unique opportunity right now for the industrial facilities specifically until June 30th of this year, this month. So we've got 10 days remaining. Those facilities can apply for this incentive to an existing employee rather than a new hire. All other non-industrial facilities, this still applies, but it will have to be a new hire. Next slide. So the next component of this expanded energy management program is the strategic energy management, SEM learning. And really this stream is about building long-term energy and emission strategies through training, coaching, and peer learning. So there's a whole curriculum that has been developed where the participants of this program get to have one-on-one coaching sessions, peer-to-peer webinars. There's some in-person training sessions as well. They dig in. This is a 2-year program, 2-year coaching that looks at all aspects of energy management. And within this specific subsection of the SEM, you're eligible up to $100,000 annually in performance incentives. So these would be incentives towards non-incentive savings that you get through this time at your facility. And then there's also up to $5,000 of enabling incentives, which are tools that can help you do your job better. So that is the strategic energy management part of this whole EEM program. And the third component that I want to allude to, and really this is the most relevant to today's topic, is our EMIS incentives. So these are incentives if you want to be implementing an energy management information system in your facility. Maybe if we can just mute the participants. Perfect, thank you. Oh, there you go. So depending on the size of your facility, you're eligible up to either $50,000 of incentives or $250,000 of incentives. The one thing that I want to stress with this program is that it doesn't have to be a whole energy management information system for your whole facility. This can be done in manageable chunks. It could be used for sub-metering, for interval metering of various components. It could be to upgrade a system. There's components of the building automation system that may be applicable under this stream as well. So if at any point you're thinking about, increasing your visibility of your data, of your equipment, of your energy data of your equipment into your facility, then I highly recommend that you reach out to us and talk to one of us so we can help you through that incentive application. And next
I think there's
slide.
a question from Alan there.
Oh, sure. Hi, Alan.
Hi, just a very quick one on this one. If we have, as part of our strategic energy management plan, a 5-year implementation for an EMIS, which includes both meters, cabling, and software, is that something that we can work with, or does it have to be first year only?
Yeah, I think reach out to us and we can talk about it. I think there's an opportunity to stage these projects. So I think absolutely. I think it's too overwhelming. I think if we look at doing everything all at once. Just a note that this EMIS incentive is only for industrial facilities. It's not for non-industrial, so that's the one thing to note. And second thing to note is it's quite an easy application. And I think in the back end, if you're working with one of us through this application, we could look at how we could, put these applications into multiple phases and just keep track of those applications on the back end to make sure that, we don't exceed that maximum incentive value that you'd be eligible for.
Okay, thank you.
So I think we're happy to be flexible.
We also have a question.
Where can I find the incentive application? Sorry, I'm just reading as it comes in. So actually, if you pop on to the next slide, So this is how to participate. Go to saveonenergy.ca/EEM, or sometimes the easiest way is just contact us at sem@ieso.ca. That is a one email that you can use for your energy manager application, for your strategic energy management application, or for your EMIS application. The EMIS application is actually quite easy. It is a prescriptive worksheet that's available on our website. But again, our website is sometimes not the easiest to navigate. So if you shoot us an email, we can direct you exactly to the right spot, and we can also direct you to the appropriate advisor that can help you through that application and answer any questions as you have or that may arise.
All right.
And that's it from me. Do we have any other questions that we want to address, or we can just move on?
I think there's a couple in the chat, so maybe we'll move on with the workshop. But Yana, if you're able to respond in the chat to some of those, that would be helpful. All right.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thanks, Yana. All right, so thanks for that. Again, stick around the chat for people who put their questions in there. Today is the second workshop in our series on energy management information systems. And whether you already have an EMIS or in the process of planning for one, you want to make sure that you have the processes in place to ensure that the benefits of the EMIS are sustained and persist over time. So today we're going to be looking at strategies to help with that. And before we get into, I do want to give a quick heads up that to keep an eye on your email for a brief survey coming soon after this workshop from Forum Research. Save on Energy is doing lots of workshops, like Yana mentioned, like this, and your feedback is really important, both to help steer the direction of the support being provided to yourselves, and also to help to ensure that it's being helpful and to understand the impact of this support so that we can continue to provide it. So, as we know, EMIS can be a really powerful tool to improve your energy management practices and drive energy savings in your facilities. And today, we're going to look at why, even with an EMIS, energy performance can drift or degrade over time. Then we're going to identify some common failure points to look out for. And then lastly, we're going to work on developing a strategy to help sustain your operational savings. Because we often see in organizations that some initial savings or benefits that come from an EMIS are not necessarily sustained. We do have a participant workbook to follow along with over time that summarizes what we're talking about and has some space for you to take notes or reflect on things related to your own organization. So there is a link to this participant workbook in the chat. It is a read-only link, so please click the link to open it, download your own copy, and then follow along with your own copy and take notes as we go. So to start off, why do operational savings often degrade? So let's start by looking at a challenge that many of you might be familiar with. It's not uncommon for a facility to implement energy saving measures or invest in EMIS and see promising results, only to watch those savings degrade or disappear even within like 6 to 18 months. And this isn't an isolated case. It can be a widespread issue that we've seen across industrial facilities, that even after major investments in equipment or software, we do often see energy performance gradually slipping back to pre-implementation levels. And an important part to note about this is often those losses aren't due to technical failure of the system that was installed. Those systems are still capable of supporting the savings, but the problem often lies in operational practices around it. So we're going to have you go back to Menti. If you still have that open in a browser or on your phone, great. If not, there's the link in the chat, or you can go to menti.com and use the code. But I'd like to get your ideas, thoughts, a little brainstorm right now on what causes those operational savings to degrade. So think about a situation where you've installed the EMIS and you've been using that data really well, driving operational savings, improving efficiency. But then after a while, those savings aren't the same. What might cause those to degrade? I saw Deepak saying manual override as one of the things in the chat there. But yeah, if you could go to Menti and share your thoughts on what are some things that might cause those savings to degrade over time. Installation of new equipment, shifting baseline, okay. Turnover of energy leaders, right. So new staff coming in, people with that knowledge of it leaving. Overload, yeah, the new employees. Yeah, okay, a lot of people are coming up, they're mentioning the turnover, staff turnover, right? Yeah, these are great ideas. And I'm sure many of you have seen these situations happen in organizations. Manual overrides taking place. Yeah, those set points, those automated set points that are there. All right. Oh, I like that one. Wrong mentality. The goals are met, so the work's done. All right, we can all go home now. Great. Okay. Those are excellent. So those are all great answers. And what we like to do is kind of group those into a few categories. There's lots of different causes potentially here. But the big sort of categories is one, operator overrides. That was mentioned. So this happens a lot, particularly in systems that are, people are under pressure for production. A line operator may override an energy efficient set point to increase throughput or address some challenge they're having. Not necessarily because that's the best way to fix the problem, but it's the quick and easy way for that operator to do so. Or, a shift comes in on the weekend, they might override schedules or EMIS alerts, and then those overrides often go unreported or undocumented. EMIS alarms, these can be very helpful in maintaining an efficient state and maintaining those savings. But sometimes we've seen where if there's a lot of alerts happening over time, if there's too many and they're not getting reviewed or addressed consistently, it can become overwhelming. People can stop paying attention. Alarms get disabled, ignored, deprioritized. I've been in a building where they're like, oh yeah, we've got, like looking at their EMIS, and I was like, oh, we've got 200 outstanding alarms. It's like, okay, what are you doing with those? It's like, we just kind of ignore that. Another big one is the lack of integration. So if energy performance isn't baked into your maintenance plans or your shift huddles or your standard operating procedures, it's this add-on, and it often gets overlooked, out of sight, out of mind. So it needs to be integrated in there. And lastly, a number of people mentioned that is the issue of staff turnover. So when experienced or knowledgeable personnel leave, so does their knowledge of how the system should be operated and maintained for efficiency. And if processes aren't well documented, new people start, or if there isn't that training, then that institutional knowledge gets lost with the people. All right. Yeah, trying to set a new high score on the EMIS alerts. Just look at the chat there. Yeah, and things can gradually creep over time. So here's just one illustrative example. So we have a case study, mid-sized manufacturing plant. They installed an EMIS, monitoring lots of things, including, the compressed air system, pressure, energy use, compressed airflow, runtime hours. And after the initial results was great. They used this data to identify where leaks were occurring, repaired those leaks. They identified an opportunity to reduce system pressure, implemented shutdown procedures, used the EMIS to monitor performance, and make sure that those leaks were being repaired. People were adhering to the shutdown procedures. Initially, great results. Within 3 months, had reduced energy consumption in the compressed air system by 8%. But Energy Matter checks on this situation 8 months later, and the energy data shows that consumption's increased almost back to what it was before. So, what might have gone wrong? So we're thinking about these different case studies, and in this situation with a compressed air system, it was happening really good, but does anyone want to share ideas of like what might have gone wrong? Thinking about these 4 areas, or maybe from your own experience, if this sounds familiar. Any thoughts on what might have gone wrong in this situation? And you can just add to chat or raise your hand if you want. I know one thing that I've seen is all, all of the above. I like that comment. Yeah, I've seen situations where, they reduce that plant pressure, but then, one piece of equipment all of a sudden starts having issues and not getting enough pressure for that. So the easiest thing for the operators to do is to increase the entire system pressure. Instead of looking at what was the root cause of this one machine all of a sudden having issues with low pressure and addressing that, they just increase the entire system pressure. Yeah, from Chris, new leaks showing up. Yeah, if those are showing up over time and people aren't doing the regular reviews, if it's not integrated into, say, the maintenance team to review that level of leaks, then those new leaks are going to be building up. Change in automated procedures. Maybe they increased use after efficiency gains. Yeah. Shut down the SOPs forgotten or overridden, new equipment air demand added. Yeah, so it could be like those overrides coming into place. That I see that issue too of like, oh, we have new processes, new equipment being added, and maybe the EMIS wasn't updated. So the planning and the updates around the EMIS wasn't integrated into changes to production plans as well. So there's this lack of integration between these two parts of the organization, which leads to the EMIS not being effectively used because it's no longer representative of the new situation. All right, great. So we've got some good examples here. The next thing, so those are common things that can go wrong, but you don't want to wait for those to happen. You don't want to have an issue occur and then be like, oh, this was the cause of it. You want to identify those risks ahead of time so that you can make sure your plans and processes prevent them from happening. So we're going to look at some of the key risk factors that contribute to those causes of savings degradation. So one of the big risk factors is, I think that came up, retooling or operational changes. So if your facility changes equipment or operations frequently, there's a greater risk that that EMIS is not going to be properly maintained. Potentially even that, alarms and alerts that were relevant before are now being triggered more than they should be because those haven't been updated to reflect new operations. Next one, the shift changes staff turnover. The more frequent that you have staff changes in your organization, whether that's in between shifts or from turnover, people leaving, new people being hired, the more likely that the EMIS isn't going to be properly maintained, monitored, or acted on. So there's more opportunities for those balls to be dropped or for people to not be clear who's responsible for something. Another big risk factor is lack of training. So if there isn't adequate training, either for the EMIS operators or for staff who are supposed to be interpreting and acting on EMIS data or notifications, it's more likely that those savings from the EMIS are not going to persist. Next one, in terms of no proper documentation. So if you don't have that adequate documentation on the EMIS processes, it increases the risk that when you do have things like staff turnover or new assignments or changes to the system, it increases the risk that that EMIS is not going to be effectively maintained or used appropriately over the long term. So having that appropriate documentation is really important. The last big risk factor here is no ownership. So when there isn't clear ownership over operation and maintenance of the EMIS, over those energy accountability centers, it increases the risk that no one is going to be taking action to maintain it or making those changes or acting on non-compliance issues that are going to impact results. So if there isn't clear ownership over alerts or other prompts, those run the risk of not getting done. So we have another example to illustrate some of these. So I want you to think about those risk factors that we just talked about, not necessarily the causes, but those risk factors. So here we have, they undertook an EMIS implementation at this fictional but based on real experiences company that you can find on page 4 of your participant workbook. They have pretty stable operations, recently installed an EMIS, getting good results so far. The energy manager was the driving force behind this, really led everything from planning to implementation and rollout. And they made a few decisions to accelerate the implementation and ensure it went quickly. So first, they decided to restrict access to the EMIS to minimize training requirements, development of documentation, and to reduce the risk of people changing things they shouldn't change. And this really did help speed up the implementation and avoid hiccups and control the data that's being sent to teams, maintaining a high level of quality. The second thing they did was they set up EMIS alarms that would be sent daily to managers and teams to lead and team leads to act on. So these alerts are going out. And the last thing they did is that they encouraged teams to review energy performance data regularly. And some did, but this was a bit inconsistent. So we're going to go back to the EMIS now. And I want you now to think about that situation of that company with that implementation. They made some decisions to get the EMIS implemented quickly and effectively, but what do you see as their biggest risk factors to sustaining those EMIS savings? So how would you rank those risk factors for the sustainment of the EMIS savings? I'll just give a minute for people to fill that out and start moving those things around. And remember that energy manager made some decisions there that I think were very effective and good decisions in terms of realizing the results quickly. All right, so we've got one comment in the chat. So the risk factors being 1, 2, 5, 3, 4. Okay, the retooling, shift changes, no ownership, lack of training, and proper documentation. Right. Okay, so we've got some results here. The biggest risk factor that people have identified was no ownership, no proper documentation, lack of training. Yeah, so it was all centered with that energy manager. They encouraged people to act on those reports, but there wasn't really any assigned ownership of, who is responsible for the energy performance in those areas. Again, no no training provided, which kind of made sense. They wanted to get it up quickly. He was working really closely with that system and knew it and was restricting access to anyone else. So it helped things get up and going quickly, but it does present this risk of, what if that energy manager is reassigned or leaves the organization? Then that's not going to sustain through there. And then on the lower end, the low risk factors, we have the shift changes, the retooling. It did mention that, they have fairly stable operations, so those might be lower risk, but we want to get a sense of which ones are going to be the priorities that we want to address in your own organizations. Yeah. So yeah, those lack of documentation training were the big ones in this situation. Now, in the participant workbook, we do have a checklist for you on page 5, which is sort of this a very quick risk assessment checklist to get a sense of, what are the risks in your organization? What are those biggest risks that might lead to savings not being sustained? So the fewer things you have checked off, the higher the potential risk of this. So I am curious if anyone does have if you already have a sense of where your risk factors may be. So whether you have an EMIS or are still in the planning or thinking about getting one, you could share in the chat just where do you think your biggest risk factors would be? What are those considerations that might contribute to savings not sustaining over time? So we'll share in the chat. I'd love to hear about where you see the risk factors in your organization. So I'd still like to see those, and we can continue that in the chat as well. I'm going to keep moving on here. So given that we have a sense of what those risk factors are, we want to think about developing a strategy to mitigate those. So we're going to take just a second to define what we mean by sustaining those operational savings, because it's more than just keeping equipment running efficiently. It's about building those systems and habits that protect those savings over time. So the first one is you want those operational savings to sustain over the long term. Oh, and thank you to the people who are stating their risk factors in their ownership, training and ownership, right? Yeah, so that's good to know. So yeah, what does that sustainment look like? Operational savings sustained over time. We're not talking about short-term wins here, which are an important part of generating those results. But here we're talking about like that true sustainment means you've locked in energy performance for the long haul, multiple budget cycles. It survives through staffing changes, production shifts, all of that. It is, you are now maintaining an efficient state of operation over that long term. In terms of that performance being tracked, reviewed, and acted on. So, those savings, you want them to sustain over the long term, but they're not going to sustain themselves. So teams need to regularly review the EMIS data, identify when systems are drifting, and take timely action. And it's about having those routines in place, not just access to the data. And the last part of what it looks like, and this is key, is that energy saving behaviors and processes can't be extra tasks. They need to be part of how the work gets done, baked into those standard operating procedures, the shift checklists, team huddles. When that happens, the sustainment becomes the default, not the exception. So it needs to really be built into it. And when we're thinking about your strategies to ensure the persistence of your EMIS benefits, there's some key elements that you should consider. Now, some of you might be familiar with this circle that we've used in our work on strategic energy management. So these are key components that contribute to the achievement of long-term energy management goals. But we can use that framework to highlight the key elements to ensure long-term success of your EMIS. So there's a lot of alignment between those, almost like a subset of maintaining that EMIS as maintaining part of your broader energy management efforts. So let's see what that can look like in these different areas. So the first one around management commitment. Commitment to maintaining that EMIS is critical to the success and ongoing sustainability of it. So that management commitment means ensuring that there's adequate resources to maintain the EMIS and that people are held accountable. And just some examples of what that can look like. We have one where leadership ensures that trained staff are available to maintain the EMIS, and there is an annual budget to establish, maintain, and update that EMIS. So, if there's changes to operations, changes to systems within the organization, within the facility, that there is budget available as part of those changes to update the EMIS, make sure it is accounting for those changes and any new equipment that's brought in. Another example around the accountability side of things is, a manufacturing VP includes monthly EMIS performance reviews and executive meetings. So this helps maintain visibility and that pressure to follow through. So knowing that people are looking, people are paying attention to the results of this is going to hold people accountable throughout the organization. On the planning side of things, having plans that lay out clear ownership and responsibility is a key piece that your strategy will need to have. So the examples we have here is a plant manager requiring each department to assign an energy point person responsible for energy performance in their department. So there's specific people that are identified, documented as being responsible for energy performance. Another example is in those plans, identifying specific individuals so that when alerts are issued, it's clear who should receive them and who's responsible for resolving them. So that's part of the EMIS plan that you have in place, is knowing when alerts are generated, who they're going to, who's responsible for it. So really helping with that ownership side of things. When it comes to identifying the opportunities and identifying improvements, it's really important to conduct regular reviews and undertake corrective action. And this should happen for both energy saving opportunities, so stuff that's seen in the energy data that the EMIS is providing, but it should also look for opportunities on the performance of the EMIS as a whole. So looking for opportunities to improve the effectiveness of your EMIS. So the examples we have here, teams review their energy performance on a weekly basis to identify issues or opportunities. It's like, okay, are we performing as expected? Is higher energy use than expected happening? What do we do about that? Making sure those reviews are happening. On the EMIS level side of things, reviewing the performance of that EMIS, things like, how long does it take to resolve alerts? When those are identified, how long do they stay there before they become resolved or that someone addresses those? And reviewing that on an annual basis to identify opportunities to improve. So where is the EMIS not being effective at communicating or getting action to take place? Where is it? How can that be addressed? When it comes to the monitoring and reporting side of things, this is where an EMIS excels, but you need to make sure that the data is accessible and actionable. So the examples here, an automotive supplier developed line level energy key performance indicators that were aligned with the department goals. So making sure that that data is relevant, people who are responsible for acting on it know what that means, know when it's higher than it should be. It's very accessible to them. They understand what it means and what to do with that data. Another example here is a die casting facility that used EMIS data to generate weekly dashboards and sent this to all the supervisors with a traffic light performance rating. So, hey, this week, green. Okay, cool. We're good. We're within the energy performance range, level of efficiency that we're expected to be. Yellow, we're getting a little borderline, might want to work into it. Red, there's some issues to address. It seems like energy waste is happening. What's happening? So making sure that that is accessible, actionable, is regular, is really useful in helping all the data that the EMIS is providing actually get put to use. The operational integration piece is also really important that we mentioned before. And not only is this critical to make sure that those actions are happening consistently, but it's also really useful because it can help staff make the connection between energy issues and other concerns that they have, like production issues, like with volume or quality, or with health and safety issues. Because a lot of times, by fixing or addressing an energy issue, you are helping those other issues. One of the big values of an EMIS is using it to support preventative maintenance. So you see, the energy consumption of a motor increasing, and having that integrated into the reviews by the maintenance team. They can see that, they can go out, investigate that motor, and possibly fix it before it fails. So, and that actually helps them. It helps them address small problems before they become big problems and avoid downtime and all of that sort of stuff. So it helps people make that linkage between energy saving for the sake of energy saving and running things efficiently because it helps all aspects of the organization. Yeah, and the other example we have for the integration of processes was aligning their project processes so that whenever changes to a production process were undertaken, like retooling presses, that included steps to verify EMIS set points, targets, alert levels, thresholds, and making sure that those were properly aligned with the new production processes that were in place or the new equipment that was installed. But having that update baked into the project processes that instigated. And this bottom section here focuses on employee engagement. And when it comes to employee engagement, both training and reinforcement play a really important role to make sure your energy savings persist. So there's one great example here of making sure that EMIS training relevant to specific roles is built into all staff onboarding, and that documentation is in place. And so anyone new coming from the organization knows, if they have to interact with the EMIS, how they're doing so, And if they're just getting alerts or have to act on the data, they know what's expected of them when they do so. And in terms of reinforcement, there's a great example here of maintenance supervisor creating a monthly energy update email that summarized key wins, anomalies, actions taken, and the recognition of staff contributions. So this can go a long way, both towards reinforcing the messaging of why we are doing these things to be efficient, but also, helping motivate people, recognizing the contributions to that success and what is being generated, what outcomes are happening. And lastly, the last section is applying a framework of continuous improvement that will help identify and address issues that might lead to loss of savings and even increase the savings you achieve. So we have some examples here of making sure that when your EMIS, when opportunities are identified or alerts are issued, or those alerts are resolved and actions are taken, that all of that is tracked and documented so that you're able to review and ensure the effectiveness of the EMIS. So are people actually acting on this? So you have this, it's able to feed into the cycle of continuous improvement where you can see what's working, what's not, how can we improve it, change how these messages are being done, maybe change the thresholds of alerts so people aren't being overwhelmed and they're only getting the alerts that are actually important. And then making sure that those EMIS operations are included as part of, like, if you have an energy management system like 50,001 or something similar, where you're auditing that system annually and identifying those nonconformities, making sure that the EMIS is part of that. So you're doing these annual reviews, looking for where it's not performing as well as you'd like it to, and making sure to address that. So I'd like you to go back to the Menti now. And if you don't have it open, you can either, again, use the link in the chat or go to menti.com and the number at the top of the screen. And now, thinking about your own organization, I'd like you to rank each of these elements of a sustainment strategy in terms of what's already in place of your organization. So showing like how much maybe in your organization, the management commitment is really strong, like there are resources and people are being held accountable. You have a really strong management commitment around that, but maybe that ownership side is a bit weak. So for each of these key components of that sustainment strategy, I'd like you to assess how strong those are in your organization. Okay, we see a pretty good spread there. Yeah, and each of these key things, they play a role in addressing those risk factors that we had before and making sure that the savings and the results from that EMIS are sustained over time. So there's going to be some that are strong in some areas, weaker than others, and it's important to understand which of these areas you may need to improve upon or to work on. I notice there's a few people who have said that they're very strong on clear ownership and responsibilities. Would one of you be willing to come off mute and maybe share what that looks like in your organization? It is anonymous, so I can't call you out specifically, but it looks like there were two that said is strong on clear ownership and responsibilities. Would one of you care to share with the group what that looks like? Jerry? You came off mute there. The other one I'd be curious to hear from is someone who scored higher on the integration into processes and integrating the EMIS data into your processes. So anyone from either of those who ranked that strong in your organization, would you care to come off mute and share with the group? Or in chat if you're not comfortable of coming off mute. All right. So if anyone does want to share like what that looks like in your organization and why you feel it's strong, please do so in the chat to share with the group. And if there's any questions around that, that would be great. Otherwise, I'm going to move on because the next thing what we want to do after we've identified, how strong are we in these areas, we want to start building that into a plan. So a sustained plan, an EMIS plan, to make sure that we're addressing all of these areas and strengthening those ones that might be a little bit weak for us. So this plan around that sustainment, that's going to help you maintain those savings. It really has two levels. In some if you have a really large, sophisticated organization, you're covering multiple sites, sometimes there might be more than two, but it still follows the same logic where, at the top level, the EMIS plan is that kind of overarching plan to manage and maintain your EMIS, like the EMIS system itself. So it contains a lot of what we just talked about in terms of roles and responsibilities, who is the person that has that administrative role within the EMIS, is responsible for keeping it up to date and accurate. This plan also includes details of the EMIS, documentation of the system, and processes and procedures like training for anyone who's going to be operating or working with the EMIS, or what to do if there are changes to the operations. How do you keep that EMIS up to date? So that's that kind of like top level plan around the EMIS system itself. But then there's a layer below that for each what we call energy accountability centers. So these centers are how responsibility for energy performance will be split up and divided within your organization. And it might be, by building, it might be by section within a building, by department, by production line, or by significant energy user. But each of those should have a clear documented plan to ensure EMIS efforts are sustained. So for each accountability center, this is going to include information like what systems are included in that accountability center, who is responsible for energy performance of that accountability center, what are the relevant KPIs, what's the schedule to review, like how often is energy performance reviewed, what does that review look like, and what is the process to escalate issues or communicate the status or results. So as one example, I remember being in one facility where each production line was an energy accountability center, and they had it set up that they had control bands, so their EMIS was monitoring the energy consumption of this production line, and if it went outside the control band, so it was like average or expected energy consumption per unit of production plus or minus 10%. If it went outside of that, it was raised at the morning scrum of that production line team. So the team lead would raise that issue with the line operators, be like, okay, it looks like we're outside of our range. Does anyone know what might be happening? Reminder to follow the standard operating procedures, shutdown procedures, whatever. If it was outside of that control band for 3 consecutive days, it gets escalated to the department manager. And maybe there's more investigations. Okay, does any equipment, is it a maintenance issue? Does some of the equipment need to be maintained, fixed? Have set points been overridden? That kind of stuff. So those types of processes all happen in that Energy Accountability Center plan. Does anyone have any questions or anything I can clarify about building the sustainment plan before we get into practicing that a little bit? Okay. If you do have any questions at any point, please raise your hand. I'll get to you. So what we're going to do now is that we've covered those essential components of the sustainment plan. We want to start applying that to your own facility. So the goal here is to give you a structure that you can build on after the workshop. So if you could turn to page 8 of your participant workbook, I would like everyone to pick one accountability center in your organization. So if you don't already have defined energy accountability centers, pick one that you think that would make sense. So like one department or one production line. And on page 8 of the participant workbook right now, and Thomas will drop the link into the chat in case anyone didn't have a chance to download it. But I want you to go to page 8, pick one department, production line, accountability center, and I want you to start filling out each of the fields on page 8. And if you don't know the exact answer for any of the fields, like whether it's Sharon or Joe who should be the primary owner, just choose something. This is just kind of a practice run for it. Right? So that should look like this. So in section 1, we have the system and owner, where we write down the system name, primary owner, some support roles, if there are any of those. Section 2, you want to identify what are those KPIs. So thinking of the department or the production line that you chose, what energy KPIs do you currently have or might have if they aren't already established? So it's often, kilowatt hour per unit of production, or various things like that. And you want to set the target or threshold for that as well. So it's like, do you know what that KPI should be? What is the average, or what is that energy per unit of production that represents well-maintained system, an efficient running system on there? And then what are the thresholds within that? Is it a highly variable system? And maybe it's sort of like, okay, we've got our target, but it goes up and down. It's ranges 10, 15% as kind of normal operations. You want to set a higher threshold. If it's pretty tight, then maybe you have like a 5% plus or minus band within that. And then you want to think about the review frequency. How often will that performance be reviewed by the owner? Is it a daily review, weekly, monthly, or other? Who's reviewing that KPI, and how is it being reviewed? Do they have access to the EMIS dashboard? Do they get sent a report? Is it in a meeting or some other approach? And then lastly, we want to fill out triggers for escalation. So what's going to cause that to escalate beyond the person who's just doing the regular frequently reviews, and what's going to trigger that escalation? So, performance drops for more than 2 days, or KPIs missed for 2 cycles, or maybe a certain, if it goes even beyond, further beyond those thresholds, and then who does it get escalated to, and what is the corrective action process and the communication tools that are going to be used around that. So when you think about this is good practice. It's also something you can take away and start working with your own energy accountability centers to help get that ownership, to help get that integration in there that can make up part of your sustainment plans. Does anyone want to come off mute and maybe share if they have a production line that they're thinking of, or an accountability center that they're thinking of, and do you have a person in mind who's going to own it, and what those KPIs or escalation process might look like? I'd love to hear an example of what you're thinking, either that you already have in place or an idea that you have to implement. So leave that with the group to work on. Yeah, actually, we've got like 2 minutes. I'd really love to hear from someone on what their plan either already involves or what it might look like for one of their systems before we move on. Right? Maybe Lucas or Luis, do you have an idea of what that might look like in your organization? Okay, so I seem to be having better luck with Menti on this. So we're going to go to that. And I see in Max, this isn't something we've done yet. We're going to suggest each of the EMIS sites work through this page, right? Yeah, I think it's very helpful to start breaking it up into those accountability centers and having each of those work on developing the plan of what does that look like for them. So before we wrap up, I would love to hear back from the audience. If you can go back to Menti, and I'd love to hear, like, based on what we talked about in terms of those plans to sustain savings. So we looked at what are those common causes, those risk factors, thought about what those risk factors might be in your organization, and how are you going to build the key components to address those into a sustainment plan. I'd love to hear, either come off mute in chat or on Menti, what's something that you're going to take away and do differently to help make sure that the benefits, the savings that you're getting out of your EMIS are going to be sustained. And you're going to get those benefits for the long term. So what's something that you're going to do differently? Okay. Do a pilot of the EMIS operational savings workbook 2 sites with a view to rolling it out tomorrow if it proves helpful. Okay, great. Build up human capacity on site outside the core energy team, right? Getting more people involved, and maybe through training or just building the awareness around that. Excellent. Make sure that ownership and accountability set clear and taken on. And that's one of the biggest things that we see, particularly in organizations that are new to getting EMIS and maybe didn't have much before in terms of using energy data before they brought on a more substantial EMIS, is sometimes the focus is on just like getting the data, doing the analysis and showing the data, but actually assigning people the specific ownership of it, where it's sort of like, okay, you get to see this data, but this is like, you are responsible for this, and making that really clear, really explicit, and providing support as well, so that they don't feel that they're, alone with that, but making them understand that, you're in charge of, you're responsible for this energy accountability center, for this production line, for this department, and you're responsible for the energy performance of it. And we're going to give you the tools and the support to help with that. But ultimately, that's your responsibility to make sure that it's, operating where we want it to be. And that's usually like one of the biggest steps that needs to happen when organizations are adapting to having like a well-measured EMIS in their facility. Okay, review baselines for KPIs, set targets. Excellent. Review trigger points, maintenance crews, operators, so you can get prompt corrective actions. Engage with HR on integrating training modules. Excellent. Measure indicators versus baseline. Okay, great. Some great next steps on there. Love to see that. I do want that reminder that the EMIS funding is available. I know there was lots of interest, lots of questions in the chat for Yana earlier. We'll drop the link to the page in the chat again in case anyone has missed that. And there's also lots of other really good stuff happening through Save on Energy. So there is virtual one-on-one coaching available. So there's all these links, I know they're highlighted here. You can't actually click the screen, but Thomas is going to drop all of those in the chat. So there's post-webinar support. So if there's anything that you covered today that you want some, one-on-one coaching support as a follow-up from today's workshop. There's a form you can fill out to request that. Also, if you're not already signed up to the monthly bulletin, you can sign up for that to get notice of upcoming workshops, webinars. The live training calendar has them all listed. And of course, the training and support webpage on Save on Energy has access to that calendar, as well as recordings and other materials from previous workshops as well. They've been getting a lot of stuff. There's actually a pretty big growing library of materials up there. So please, if you haven't checked that out recently, please go and do so. Save on Energy also has a YouTube channel on there that has a lot of recorded workshops, as well as video courses and things on there that can be very useful to the work that you're doing. So thank you everyone for your work today and participation. Hopefully this was useful, and look forward to seeing you in our future workshops. Yeah, and that wraps it up for today. I do see a question from Jeff. Is there a max percent? Yeah, I think it's 50%, up to 50% of eligible costs to a total of 250,000. All right, thanks everyone.